Welcome everyone to the Dr. Virginia Radley Fellowship webinar. I'm Juliana Hernandez Camiso, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Policy Implementation and Deputy Chief of Staff to the Chancellor. Before I get started, I wanted to quickly let you know that this webinar will be recorded and the presentations will be available if requested through research@suny.edu. Thank you for joining us today. It's an honor to moderate this discussion and gather with you during Women's History Month to celebrate the transformative leadership of women across New York State. From our first female governor, Kathy Hochul, to our legislative leaders like Andrea Stewart Cousins, the first woman to lead the Senate, and the Assembly Majority Leader, Crystal Peoples-Stokes. We are witnessing a remarkable moment in history where women are leading at the highest levels of state government, a reality that felt far less attainable just a decade ago. We also celebrate the extraordinary women guiding SUNY forward, from SUNY Board Chair Meryl Tisch to the 22 female presidents serving across our campuses. We honor their leadership, express our deep gratitude for their impact, and reflect on the legacy of the trailblazers who helped shape the State University of New York into the system it is today. For this webinar, we are shining a special light on trailblazers whose leadership and spirit continue to guide SUNY's values. You know her as Dr. Virginia Radley, the first female president of a SUNY state-operated campus, leading SUNY Oswego from 1977 to 1988. Dr. Radley was widely recognized for breaking barriers, elevating academic excellence, and strengthening opportunities for research, student success, and inclusive leadership across SUNY. Prior to her presidency, she served as SUNY Oswego's first female provost and executive vice president, guiding the institution through financial challenges in the late 1970s. Earlier in her career, she also served as Nazareth College's academic dean and was the first laywoman to hold a top administrative post there. Her leadership reshaped SUNY Oswego and elevated the role of women in higher education administration across the state. During her tenure, she increased the number of women faculty and staff by 45% to ensure women were more properly represented across the college and increased enrollment of students from underserved communities. Radley's career reflected a deep belief in the power of the humanities, student achievement, and inclusive leadership. And to honor her significant impacts, in 2023, Chancellor John B. King Jr. established the Dr. Virginia Radley SUNY Fellowship Program to honor her legacy and to advance SUNY's mission to illuminate the historic and often overlooked contributions of women shaping New York State. This fellowship supports a SUNY faculty scholar focused on uncovering and elevating women's leadership across the state. Their work explores the many ways women have shaped New York's cultural, educational, and civic landscape, from the faith-driven activism of the early women's rights movement to Harriet Tubman's enduring legacy, to the groundbreaking artists such as Katarina Jabaro, who helped desegregate the New York opera stage. Through their research, Radley Fellows bring forward stories too often underrepresented in our historical narrative, ensuring that these contributions become part of SUNY's collective memory and public understanding. Their findings not only enrich scholarship, but also deepen the way our campuses and our communities understand leadership, equity, and the evolution of opportunity in New York State. We're going to hear from the Virginia Radley Fellows later on, and to learn more about their research and what inspired their work. But first, I'd like to introduce a dear friend, someone many of us across the system admire for her tenacity, remarkable vision, and exceptional leadership and research. Please help me welcome Dr. ShahedipourSandvik. She is the Senior Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation, and Economic Development at the State University of New York, and an accomplished physicist and nanotechnology researcher.
Thank you very much, Juliana. And of course, you're a dear friend, and every day interacting with you and many just remarkable women across SUNY, it's really just a privilege. Good morning, everybody. Again, it's really a privilege to be here and welcoming those of you on Zoom, and especially our Radley Fellows being here today. So It's wonderful to be together today, and especially during Women's History Month. I mean, so meaningful, not just to reflect on the past, but to recognize how much of that history is still being uncovered, interpreted, in many ways written today. That's exactly what the fellowship really represents. Dr. Virginia Radley believed deeply in the power of ideas and in the responsibility of institutions to create space for those ideas to grow. At her inauguration in 1978, she said, "The future of this country and indeed of this world relies on an educated and enlightened citizenry." That's a powerful statement. And it is also a call to action because an educated and enlightened citizenry doesn't happen by accident. It requires institutions like SUNY and requires scholars who are willing to ask difficult questions, surface overlooked histories, and expand how we understand the world around us. That's where the Radley Fellowship becomes so important. It asks us to look more closely, to examine whose stories have been told, whose contributions have been recognized, and where we still have to do work. Because the truth is, much of the impact women have had across New York and beyond has not always been fully visible, and that's where scholarship matters. The work of our Radley Fellows, Dr. Elizabeth Garner Masarik, Dr. Ann Bailey, and Dr. Caroline Guzski, does exactly that. It brings forward voices, histories, and perspectives that deepen our understanding not only of the past, but of the present we are shaping. And in doing so, it strengthens SUNY as a system because it reflects who we are at our best, a place where discovery, inclusion, and impact are deeply connected. So, as we begin this conversation, I would simply offer this. The work you will hear about today is not just about documenting history, it's about expanding the narrative and helping to shape a more informed, more inclusive, and more enlightened future. And that feels very much in the spirit of Dr. Radley. So, thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Shadi. You are a true inspiration, and we are just so grateful to have you in leadership here. Now, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce a special guest who has graciously taken the time to join us and speak with you today. Dr. Dorcey Applyrs, the 76th Mayor of Albany, New York. She brings a deep background in public health and previously served as the city's chief auditor. Her administration is focused on people-first leadership, equity, accountability, and measurable results that improve daily life for Albany residents. Her centers her work on expanding economic mobility, strengthening public safety and community trust, increasing housing stability, and improving public health and neighborhood vitality. She made history this year as Albany's first Black mayor and city's second female mayor, and we are proud to call her an alumna of the University of Albany and a valued member of the SUNY family. Welcome, Mayor, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so very much for having me in the warm introduction. And yes, like all of you, people ask me all the time, are you busy? Busy? Of course I'm busy, but there are just some things that you have to do. And I consider this one of them. One, to be in community with my SUNY colleagues. My start, how I ended up on the path to becoming mayor, really started with an acceptance letter from UAlbany. And when I say that, I am so deeply grateful for the investment, the foundation that SUNY Albany has afforded me. It's hard to even put into words. So thank you so much for that introduction. I also, in his absence, I don't see Chancellor King here, but just want to acknowledge him and his leadership. He's been a strong supporter, and I actually met Chancellor King as a council member when he worked in Albany years ago. and had the opportunity from afar to observe his trajectory and how he's navigated from New York to Washington, back to New York. And so he is a leader that I admire and respect. So just wanted to acknowledge his leadership, and also want to thank the leadership for our Senior Vice Chancellor. Thank you for the work that you all do each and every day. It's important, even at a moment where academic institutions are under attack. Research is under attack, and it's great to be in community with people who understand the significance of having research and having research institutions. I'll just quickly say to all of you, all of the presenters and all of the women represented, aside from the research you do, thank you for showing up each and every day. I had a chance to address a group of women yesterday, and said very candidly, it is not easy being a woman. And on top of that, being a professional woman, being someone who balances whether you have children or you're taking care of your parents, and still having to navigate systems and institutions that oftentimes we are very few around the table. And so despite that, we still show up and we still push for more representation and policies and environments that allow and create space for women to not only show up to work each day, but thrive and be successful in our roles. We collectively know that we have unique needs, as we are often caregivers. And if those unique needs are not taken into account in the places that we show up and work, it is very challenging to do that work. The last thing that I just wanted to highlight is on this topic of research. And I think about my own journey to pursuing my doctoral degree at Albany, and really want to acknowledge all of the female professors who charted a path for me that was not an easy path, but they understood the challenges, the barriers, and they themselves put themselves oftentimes in harm's way to ensure that I would be able to complete my doctoral degree. These women on my dissertation committee, predominantly female dissertation committee, I think actually everyone on the committee, showed up for me and allowed me the opportunity to conduct my research and do so in a way that it helped to get me across the finish line. And when we conduct research, as was pointed out, we know who has been a part of the narrative and looked at in terms of research, and who hasn't been. And so, for example, my dissertation topic was lupus. Again, a topic that is under-researched and primarily impacts women, especially women of color, and even more so Black women. And so when we are at the table and when we are given the resources, we ensure that we are shining a light on issues in communities that often don't get that. So thank you all so much for having me today. Thank you for your commitment to advancing the lives of others. And it is, again, a privilege to be in community with you. Happy Women's History Month.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and thank you for your service. On a personal note, I have to say, since you were sworn in just around January, I've been to probably 3 events with you. And at every single event, you've brought your beautiful daughters with you. And I have to say, I have young kids too, and it's compelling and bold to see how you are inserting them into your work, showing that as a woman, as a mother, you can lead and juggle and lead with compassion. And so I just wanted to share that, because even when you're not speaking, we see you, and we appreciate for you just standing boldly and making a change for the city of Albany. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those kind words. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, it's my pleasure to transition us into the Dr. Radley Fellow presentations. You will hear from 3 of our fellows, the amazing research they have developed during their fellowship, each with a compelling story and inspiration. After each presentation, there will be time for questions. Please feel free to use the chat box and we will get to each of them. First to present is Dr. Elizabeth Masarik. Dr. Elizabeth Masarik is an assistant professor in the history department at SUNY Brockport, whose research explores the intersections of gender, religion, and political activism in the 19th and early 20th century America. Her current Radley Fellowship project examines how faith traditions shaped the women's rights movement in New York State. Through her scholarship and public history work, she brings forward stories that deepen our understanding of women's leadership and the forces that shaped reform movements across the state. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Masarik.
Thank you so much. Let me bring up my slideshow. Okay, real quick. All right, are you seeing my slides? Yes, okay, thank you. All right, let's see. Sorry, all right, here we go. Hello, thank you so much for having me today. This project grew out of my work on a book called Spiritualism's Place. It was a close look at Lilydale, New York, which is the largest spiritualist community in operation today. And in researching that book, it introduced me to a group of remarkable New York State women that I wanted to explore further. And so the Radley Fellowship allowed me to make that deeper exploration. And I just want to say I am so grateful for SUNY for investing in the humanities. Dr. Virginia Radley was a pioneer in highlighting the importance of history, particularly women's history, to the SUNY system. And I am glad that SUNY is continuing that tradition by funding historical research. This type of research that we are doing cannot be created by AI. It has to be dug out of the archives physically. And that takes time and that takes money. This is a list of all of the archives that I was able to physically visit through the support of the Virginia Radley Fellowship. So I just want to give a deep thank you for supporting that very important work. Now, we're here today to celebrate women's history and women's leadership in New York State. So I want to draw your attention to a religious movement that is founded right here in New York State, which is spiritualism. And it was a catalyst and a training ground for many women leaders in New York State. Lilydale is an intentional community of spiritualists. It was founded in 1879 in Chautauqua County, and it is still running today. Now, to understand spiritualism's importance, we need to go back to the early 19th century in Western New York. This region is known to historians as the burned over district because it was swept repeatedly by the fires, quote unquote fires, of religious revivalism during a period known as the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was marked by a proliferation in alternate and new religions, which popped up not only in the era, but particularly in this region of Western New York. One of the biggest and most lasting ones was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons.
Elizabeth, I just want to stop you for a second. I'm so sorry. Your slides aren't advancing, so I just wanted to stop you before we got too deep into your presentation.
No problem.
I just wanted,
so
I think
you
could put it into it. Right now it's the burned over district, but it's not in presentation mode.
Okay.
Which is at the very bottom of the of your screen there, to the right. So if you go down to the right.
Okay, I don't.
Like towards the bottom of your slide, where you can make the view bigger.
Okay.
There's a little icon where you can click and it goes into presentation mode.
How about that?
Oh, all the way to the from current slide. Oh, just go over one more no, I'm sorry. So if you go to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen.
Yeah, I'm over there now.
Of yours. Oh, of your screen.
Yeah.
Oh, you are. Oh, this is weird because your mouse looks like it's up at the top right.
Okay. Well, you know what? Why don't I just
Okay.
bring it from this point here?
Okay,
And
great.
yeah, that way we
Okay.
can just keep on going. Sorry about that,
All right,
everybody.
great. Thank you. So sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. All right, so we're talking about the burned over district and the importance of kind of space and place in this. Let's see. So the burnover district, it's this area that is kind of alive with the fire of religious revival. The Mormons are coming out of this area. Also, Seventh-day Adventists are coming out of this area, and spiritualists, which is, of course, still a religion that is practiced to this day. It started in 1848 with the Fox sisters. They were some young girls that were hearing noises or rappings, knockings in their house there in Western New York in Hydesville, completely freaking their mother out because they're basically kind of starting to commune with spirit or with ghosts. Their mother goes out to the community and says, come in here, my girls are driving me crazy. And long story short, serious people began to take this seriously, particularly Isaac and Amy Post. They come in, they are radical Quakers, they are abolitionists. They test the girls, they find that the spirit communication is credible, and basically the religion kind of explodes in popularity from that point onward. Spiritualism is the belief that we can communicate with those who have passed on. Now, spiritualism was inherently political. It preached the equality of men and women, and it gave women the religious authority to challenge patriarchal norms. And so that gets us to Carrie E.S. Twing, who I would like to concentrate on today. She is born in Chautauqua County in 1844, so right there at the tail end of that Second Great Awakening. She is raised in that kind of religious revival environment. She is able to commune with spirit since a very early age. She's educated in New York's public common schools. She worked as a teacher herself. In 1871, she marries Herbert Twing, and together they built and managed a 200-acre grape farm in Westfield, New York, which is in Chautauqua County. So she's born in a rural area. She lives in a rural area, but yet she becomes one of the most effective advocates for women's rights in the Empire State. And spiritualism gave her a public voice and a political framework for that advocacy. And so from the 1870s onward, she traveled the spiritualist lecture circuit, building a regional reputation across the Northeast and the Midwest. And her public addresses consistently linked spiritualist belief to women's rights. She declared that the mission of spiritualism was to, quote, let down the bars of progress for women. She challenged biblical injunctions against women speaking in public and holding authority in churches. And so, she's traveling constantly throughout this period, but throughout all of this, her focus is never far from her Westfield vineyard. She remained deeply rooted to her rural community in Chautauqua. Now, Chautauqua County is rural, but it is far from isolated. So Lilydale, the spiritualist community, was founded in Chautauqua County. So was the famous Chautauqua Institute. Chautauqua was connected to major reform movements by railroad, connecting it to larger cities like Cleveland, Buffalo, Albany, and places beyond. And so location really matters because it is part of the burned over district, that Western New York kind of hotbed, but it's also an agricultural region. And so to understand Twing's leadership, we need to understand her participation in something called the Grange movement. New York farmers in the 1870s through the 1890s were experiencing very real economic crisis. The opening of vast wheat fields on the Great Plains, combined with falling transportation costs, meant that New York farmers were not competing in commodity grain production anymore. They were undercut by cheaper Western grain. And so New York farmers experienced a very sharp decline between the 1870s and the 1890s. And so in response, they had to diversify their crops, and they began turning towards dairy and fruit farming to stay competitive. In Chautauqua County, grape cultivation and fruit farming became central to that local agricultural economy. Farmers in New York State turned to the patrons of husbandry, also known as the Grange. This was a social, educational, and community-rooted organization that helped farmers collectively bargain for legislative support and other forms of assistance. And it was women who were a driving force behind this movement. Women were granted full membership in the Grange. Women could hold office, they could debate policy, and vote on resolutions. And it was the only mixed gender institution where rural women could build political skills before actually having the ballot. And so Carrie Twing became more active in the Grange throughout the 1880s. She became a leader, not only in the Westfield Grange chapter, but also on the statewide Grange platform. She was a driving force in leading the Grange to support women's suffrage. She was appointed state deputy of the New York State Grange for Chautauqua County. She was a regular speaker at statewide Grange meetings and events. And she did all of this while simultaneously publishing books on spiritualism and speaking on the spiritualist lecture circuit. So she was simultaneously a Grange leader, a recording secretary of the Chautauqua County Women's Christian Temperance Union. She's a prominent spiritualist medium and author, and she is actively engaged with the New York State Women's Suffrage Association. And she's moving fluidly across these movements, using the networks and the credibility of each to strengthen the others. Twing built a presence across New York State as a trusted women's rights activist and linked her reform work to national networks. At the 1892 National Grange meeting in New Hampshire, she simultaneously represented both the Westfield Grange and the Chautauqua Political Equality Club, which was a suffrage organization. She did the same at the 1893 National Grange meeting held in Syracuse. She was serving in effect as a dual ambassador between the farm community and the suffrage movement, making the case for women's rights in both directions. At the 1901 Pan American World's Fair in Buffalo, in the Temple of Music, which is pictured there, just days before President McKinley was shot in that same building, Twing delivered her Grange address titled "The American Home, the Hope of the Nation," which argued that only through women's enfranchisement could the moral and civic integrity of the nation be properly safeguarded. And the speech really positioned women's political participation as a patriotic obligation. By 1899, Twing's standing in the New York State Women's Suffrage Association had risen to the point where she was a headline speaker at its annual convention. She was placed on the program immediately before Susan B. Anthony. She appeared on promotional materials advertising the event, highlighting that Twing had the name recognition and the audience to draw people to the cause. In November 1894, Carrie Twing stood before the New York State Women's Suffrage Association convention and delivered a clear declaration, quote, "The mothers, wives, and daughters residing even in the remotest of the state have come to the conclusion that a republic of equal citizenship cannot be a man's government. It is for your honorable body to make it possible that liberty will no longer be an empty word to the Empire State." And so what made that moment remarkable was not just what Twing said. It was who she was and who she represented. She was a grape farmer from Chautauqua County in Western New York, speaking not only in her own name, but as the official representative of the New York State Grange, the state's largest farmers organization. The work Carrie Twing did, building rural suffrage constituencies through spiritualism and the Grange, speaking across the state for 3 decades, was foundational to women's rights in New York State. The movement succeeded not because of a handful of iconic leaders, but because of hundreds of women like Twing, who organized their communities, built cross-movement coalitions, and made the case for women's rights in every room they entered. And critically for Twing, those rooms included the seance circle and the spiritualist camp meeting, as much as the suffrage convention hall and the rural Grangers meeting. Her faith was not separate from her activism, it was its origin. Spiritualism gave her the conviction that women's equality was not a political preference, but a spiritual truth, and that belief powered everything that followed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Masarik. I have a question. I think some folks you're welcome to use the chat box, but one of my questions is, I know that you used some of the resources from this fellowship to travel to visit some of these archives. So how far did you travel? And then my second question is, what was the most shocking information you found on Carrie Twing?
Oh gosh. Let's see, the farthest I traveled, I had to travel to California because one of the women, not Carrie Twing, but another woman that I'm focusing on that kind of cut her teeth, so to speak, at spiritualism in Lilydale, ended up moving to California and became the president of the Women's Suffrage Association in California. And she was president of that association in 1911 when California passed the right for women's suffrage in that state. So lots of just really amazing women coming out of this research. So I went to California. I did go to Florida to follow Twing. People in Lilydale, New York created a sister spiritualist community in Lilydale. So they were snowbirds even back then. And so they would go to Lilydale, or they would go to Cassadaga, Florida in the winter time. And they had a spiritualist camp there. And so Carrie and Herbert Twing did have a home or a cottage in the spiritualist community there in Cassadaga. So I was able to go there, and their records are not organized. I mean, the Lilydale records are getting better organized, but they're still in dire need of help. These are records that have the potential to really disappear, and the Cassadaga ones in Florida are even worse. And so a lot of what I was trying to do was go there and try to take digital pictures of as much as I possibly could to create an archive, so that if rain and time and mold does get those archives, that they do still live on. So again, the real importance of physically going to these places and documenting is really important. The most surprising thing, on one hand, this might sound kind of kooky to some people, the thought of like talking to ghosts and, spirit wrappings and seances and all of this kind of stuff. In the 19th century, it was not that shocking, particularly when we think about the, kind of 1820s to 1840s, but even further on in the 19th century, this is a time of technological innovation. So first you have the Erie Canal, and then you have things like the steam engine, and then the telegraph. These are things that are changing people's conception of time and space, right? So something that would have taken weeks, months, or years to travel or go to is now taking a matter of days, or in the sense of a telegraph, minutes, right? You're telling me that I can send a note from my home in Buffalo, New York to Washington, D.C. through a list of Morse code taps, and they can hear what I'm trying to say in a matter of minutes. Like, that's magical. That really is changing our conception of reality. So when you're thinking about it in that sense, spiritualism is kind of a scientific testing of what are the bounds of our reality. And if we can talk to somebody in Washington, D.C., why can we not talk to perhaps somebody behind the veil, right? And so in that conception of it, you can begin to understand why spiritualism became such a phenomenon and why a lot of people took it very seriously. It was not a totally fringe movement. A lot of serious people were involved in the spiritualist movement.
Thank you, Dr. Masarik, and thank you for shining a light on Carrie Twing, right? Many of us, this is the first time we're hearing about her, so it's telling and it's important to highlight. We will have some time after 11 to have a further discussion, so for those of you who have more questions, hold it till then. And now I'd like to transition before we continue to the next presenter. It's my honor to introduce and welcome our SUNY board trustee, Courtney Burke, who was able to join us today and share a few remarks. Trustee Courtney Burke joined the SUNY Board of Trustees in 2016 and serves as the chair of the Research and Economic Development Committee. She's currently a principal consultant at Sachs Policy and previously served as Chief Operating Officer of Haney's, Senior Vice President at Albany Medical Center, Deputy Secretary for Health for Governor Cuomo, and Commissioner of OPWDD. She is a SUNY alumna, earning her master's in public health at UAlbany. Thank you, Trustee Burke, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Juliana, for having me today. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be on this program today, particularly being between two women that I consider architects of change, you among them, Juliana. But we also, I know, have Dr. Ann Bailey, who's going to be speaking as well. And I have to say that I had the privilege of listening to Dr. Bailey not too long ago talk about the work that she's doing at the Harriet Tubman Center, and I was blown away by all of that work. So I see her as an architect of change, as well as many of the other speakers on your agenda. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel today. Just one thing I wanted to say as a SUNY trustee, the importance of SUNY and what it has done to promote women over time and the role that it's playing now in making sure that women have access to higher education and all the same opportunities as everyone else. So it is an honor to serve as a SUNY trustee. One thing I wanted to say about Dr. Virginia Radley before I turn it back over to you, Juliana, is that she really was a pioneer in the SUNY system. I think you probably talked a little bit about this, and some people on here know about her history, but she was president of SUNY Oswego, and that was a big deal because she was one of the first women to be appointed for a state-operated campus president, which was a big deal back in 1977 when she first got that appointment, and she served until 1988. And during her tenure, she did a lot of really important things to help hire women as faculty, to pilot an honors program for talented students. And it was a difficult time back in the 1970s financially, so it wasn't like it was a cakewalk for her administratively. So she was doing a lot of those hirings and those changes at a time when that campus was experiencing some real challenges. So anyway, I think it's wonderful that you're doing this today in honor of Women's History Month. And you have obviously my support as a woman who's on the SUNY Board of Trustees and an alum of SUNY to continue the great work. And I look forward to more of the programming. Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you, Trustee Burke, and thank you for your service, not only to this board, but this great state. We're very fortunate to have you. I would now like to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Ann Bailey. Dr. Ann Bailey is a professor of history and the director of the Harriet Tubman Center for Freedom and Equity at Binghamton University. Her research centers on African American history, memory, and reconciliation, with a particular focus on the legacies of slavery and the work of Harriet Tubman. As a Radley Fellow, she extends the impact of her work at the Tubman Center to elevate overlooked narratives and expand public understanding of freedom, equity, and women's leadership in New York State. Join me in welcoming Dr. Bailey.
Good morning. I want to first check that my my PowerPoint is up and that you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Very good. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this invitation. And it's such an honor to be in this company. I have to say this because as you all know, there are more of us in these rooms from which we were historically excluded, but there's still times that we feel alone. So it's wonderful to be in company of such great, powerful women, including my fellow Radley Fellows, Dr. Guzski, Dr. Masarik, thank you, and Courtney, Burke, Trustee Burke, thank you for those kind words, and thank you also, Assistant Vice Chancellor Juliana Comissio. And I have to say, those who are working behind the scenes to make the Radley Fellows program work, Jennifer, Jackie, and others, thank you so much for this opportunity. So, history and historical preservation, why it matters more than ever. I have to say that I have been doing this work now for several decades, and for a long time, I knew I had this calling, this passion to do this work in history. And I thought of it, quite frankly, as my passion. I knew it had implications beyond that, and I definitely wanted to, as I would have said, I think in graduate school, bring history to the people, bring it out of academia and make it something that was much more publicly accessible and not just like an academic topic. So I knew that it had that potential, but that was public history, and that kind of work was not very popular when I was in graduate school. And I still somewhat thought of it as something that I'm passionate about. And it's just these, I'm just one of these nerds in the attic or the archives. And, it doesn't have a lot of pertinence, perhaps, to many people. And certainly people that I would talk to would think of it as something that was, a tough subject that they had in high school that they're glad that they no longer have to do anything about. And I think what's happened to me in the last few years, what's happened to the country and the world in the last few years, is that we are beginning to see the importance of history and why it matters, and also historical preservation. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today, and how the Radley has helped me to extend that work and get me out of the attic and to share all over why history and historical preservation matters and how it's pertinent to us today. So I want to start first with Martin Luther King Jr. And he has a powerful sermon in 1956 called The Death of Evil Upon the Seashore. And in this sermon, and he gave the sermon in St. John the Divine in New York City, he shares the story of the exodus of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. And he shares the story, this famous story, as a metaphor for the deliverance of Black Americans from both official slavery, but also from Jim Crow laws. And so he's looking back at this story, thousands of years old, which is recorded in the Bible, and he's saying, their 400 years of slavery of the Israelites is very similar to the 400 years of enslavement from 1619, right, to 2019 of African Americans in America. And it's also the second anniversary, 1956 is the second anniversary of Brown versus Board of Ed, the important Supreme Court ruling, of course, that celebrates integration, essentially, and ushers in integration in terms of schooling and so much more. So Martin Luther King Jr. in this particular sermon is really saying that this 400 years, remember your history, remember this 400 years of slavery. It's informative to how we do the work that we're going to do now. And this is the 1950s. So remember, it's just beginning. The civil rights movement is really just beginning to take form. 1950s, 1960s. It's going to lead up to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But that's yet to come. And the 19 Civil Rights Act is why we're here. It's that groundbreaking law that says we cannot discriminate in terms of employment based on the color of your skin, your culture, your background, your religious affiliation, and also your gender. And that's what made the 1964 Civil Rights Act is what made it possible for Dr. Radley to become President Radley in the 70s and 80s. Because, again, those doors, that access, that's what it granted. It said qualifications had to be in place. Let's be very clear. But once you were qualified, you now had access. There was no point in having qualifications if indeed you were systemically not able to have access because you were a person of color, because you were a woman, and so forth. So this is so critical, and this history is so critical. And this is, again, gets me back to why I've been so passionate about history in the first place. So I want to give you a little bit of just quick background on my historical journey. I have been interested in history, and particularly the history of people of African descent, starting with Africa. So I was not content to just start with the African American experience or even the Caribbean experience. I'm originally from Jamaica, and I claim that as also my other home. But I really wanted to go back to the African continent and look at that history writ large, if you will. So a lot of my early work was in Africa. My first book, in fact, was African Voices of the Atlantic Slave Trade, Beyond the Silence and the Shame. And I spent time collecting oral histories on the continent of people who still remembered in various families, including chiefs, what the experience of enslavement was like, what the experience was both as the people who were enslaved, but also people to some extent who were also involved as traders. So I was looking at this joint experience and looking at the devastation that it caused the continent, specifically West Africa, in this book. I also wanted to look very deeply at the African American experience, because the African American experience, of course, is deeply tied to West and Central Africa through the enslavement of Africans through that trade. And so this is my last book, which was in 2017, that was published by Cambridge University Press, called The Weeping Time, looking at the largest slave auction in American history, and trying to, again, look at what this period, what's the impact, if you will, because that's always been my preoccupation. What's the impact of enslavement? What's the impact of the slave trade on people of African descent? And in fact, not just people of African descent, but the country as a whole in terms of America and the world as a whole. Eventually, that led to my work with the 1619 Project, which was a really wonderful opportunity, again, keeping Reverend Martin Luther King's reference in mind, to look at the 400 years of enslavement from 1619, which is more or less the earliest presence of people of African descent in America, consistent presence through enslavement through to 2019, gave you that 400-year lens, if you will, and a wonderful opportunity to look at, well, progress that has been made, but also the great challenges that remain and the great legacy that continues in the present. So I was really pleased and happy to be a part of that project, including a 16-page article in the New York Times Magazine which was called They Sold Human Beings Here, which looked at various auction sites across the country. So this is some of my history work. And I want to just pivot now to how I got into historical preservation. So I've been doing all this work in history for a very long time. I did not necessarily make the connection between history and historical preservation. That seemed to me almost like another field. But as you do this work, what you realize is, in fact, the two are greatly connected, and that you don't want to, in my view, do history and not pay a little bit of attention to how that history is being preserved, especially for the public. So let's shoot to 2020. So 2019, we've got the 400th anniversary of people of African descent in the United States. 2020, we have the George Floyd incident, which turns out to be a real inciting incident, if you will. As you may remember, during that year, there was such uproar about his killing and his murder that there were Confederate statues that were being pulled down across the country. There are 2,000 plus Confederate statues, by the way, in our country. And in all different places. And there was an outroar. And for some reason, people came together and saw this as a symbol of injustice. And so our campuses, including some of our SUNY campuses, including our campus at Binghamton University, became a bit of a hotbed of uproar as well. Like, what is happening here? How could this happen? And how do we look at things in our own community that we can improve, if you will, in terms of race relations? That brought the Harriet Tubman Center to this process of truth and reconciliation. And I really wanted to just emphasize that this is how this was born. We decided as a campus to form our own Truth and Reconciliation Commission, inspired by the original one that was done in South Africa, and to look at how we could bring people together to listen of all various viewpoints, whether it was everybody from the janitor to the faculty member to the students, the graduate students, undergraduates, alumni, to talk about how to improve race relations on campus and how to really concretely make a difference, and positively, not just focusing on the negative, but to look at concrete recommendations. And so that's what we did. And this type of historical background really helped us to say, okay, can we do it in our small context on our campus? And we did. And these were some of the action items that came out of that, a truth and reconciliation process. We decided that we'd have these individual hearings. We decided that public history and public education would be very important. We decided that we wanted to be a model, if you will, for how other universities and maybe even other communities looked at difficult histories, difficult topics. And we also decided we wanted to enhance the campus itself and let the campus reflect some of this type of work that we were doing. That led us to the Downtown Freedom Trail. And I'm just going to go through a couple of these. I don't want to take too much time, but so that you have a little idea of how we came up with this. It was so important to share with you. It came out of a truth and reconciliation process. People saying that they didn't feel visible on campus, or they didn't feel visible in the Binghamton community, that somehow they were there for maybe 4 years, maybe longer if they're a graduate student, but they didn't necessarily feel a sense of belonging. And I think as women, we understand what that means. And we were hearing that on so many levels that we realized we had to kind of dig around and look and say, was it always like this? And as it turns out, no, it wasn't. Binghamton, in downtown Binghamton specifically, but our area in general, was actually a hotbed of civil rights activity. Who knew? And we were excited to find out that there were so many major and important figures, hidden figures, if you will, including women, that were involved in advancing civil rights, freedom, and equity in our community. And so that's how the trail was developed. Harriet Tubman among them. She moved in these circles. She certainly has her strongest outpost, of course, we know, is in Auburn, New York. But needless to say, Harriet Tubman was a symbol for all of the best that was happening in civil rights and the advancement of equity and freedom at that time and in the pre-Civil War era. So we started with her and her installation, which took place in March 18th, specifically on March 21st, when we actually celebrated, her presence in our community. And I want to say that she is on our campus, but she's also off our campus at the same time. Where we positioned her was so that she would be a beacon of light, not just for our, students and faculty and our staff, but really for the entire community. And this whole project has been community fed and led. We've been amazed at how they have been such an incredible part of the development of this project and remain a part of all of it. So this was actually just a quick picture of the installation ceremony that we had, which was somewhat historic at our campus on March 21st. People came from all over, as far as Canada even. They came from all over to celebrate Harriet's installation on our campus and to symbolize that this is what America stands for, that Harriet Tubman and the other heroes, such as some of them that I'm going to mention today, Elias Hawley, Black and white heroes on this 13-stop trail, they represent America. That's really what we were trying to say. They much more represent America than the Confederates that are valorized across our country, and that there's, if you're looking carefully, you'll see that they're making a comeback. You know, Confederate statues, Confederate names that were coming down are now going back up. So we have a challenge ahead of us. But for us, it was about recapturing the narrative and talking about what America really stands for. Somebody like Elias Hawley, who was not just an abolitionist, but he started and helped to found the Broome County Anti-Slavery Society. Again, this was not common knowledge in Binghamton. It's there in the history books, but for us to pull it back out and to be re-inspired in the present day. Stephen Hand, another abolitionist, his home, which was a refuge for people fleeing on the Underground Railroad Trail, his home is actually the site of Binghamton City Hall right now. That was the site originally. So wonderful hidden history, if you will. And here I show you this wonderful picture of the great, great, great grandson of Stephen Hand, who reached out to us when he heard what we were doing with the trail and said, you know, I just wanted to let you know that I recently found out that we're connected to the Hand family. And we just embraced him and invited him to come and speak and to be a part of our whole racial reconciliation process, which was just lovely. There's him and his daughter that were there. And it was history coming full circle. We were so happy to have him there. I could go on and on. I don't want to go on too much more, but Garrett Smith, another famous figure in New York State, who was instrumental in helping the African-American community, particularly men at that time, have an opportunity to vote. Susan B. Anthony, who's also a part of our trail. Turns out she came to Binghamton to advance not only women's rights, but the rights of people of color, particularly in gaining an education at anti-slavery conventions in Binghamton. Again, who knew? School number 8, a school that was wonderfully pioneering, because it was like one of the first schools for Black children in the North or anywhere. And it took place in Binghamton. And we were happy to say that started in 1861, a full 6 years before Howard University, for example, was founded. So when you think about it, some really pioneering things happening in our state. And our trail starts with Harriet Tubman, it ends with Martin Luther King Jr. And we think what we're saying is that these young people, they're passing these heroes and all the ones in between, including the women and the men of the past, are passing the baton on to these young people that you see here, who need to take up the banner, and they are taking up that banner. So I want
Dr.
to say,
Bailey, not to interrupt you, because we do have a question. We want to make sure we get to that.
Sure.
I do want to just say thank you to also inviting the Chancellor for that unveiling. He said it was remarkable to see the statue and just the work in the community that's going on around this. So if you don't mind just taking your slides down, we're going to have Jen deliver the question for you. We want to make sure the attendees can hear an answer.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
Dr.
Sure, go ahead.
We did have
Yes.
one question from an audience member. They wanted to know how long in miles, perhaps, the walking downtown Binghamton Freedom Trail is. Do you have that
It's
information?
2.5 miles. It's
How
two
many?
and a half miles. So it's 2.5 miles. So it depends on how fast you walk or how long you stay at each stop, but it's very doable. Hmm.
Excellent. Thank you. This is fascinating. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bailey. Something you said that I think is going to resonate with me for quite a bit is that if it wasn't for the Civil Rights Act, Dr. Radley would not have been president, right? So like it's putting those pieces together. It's the historical preservation part of it. And a question I'm going to ask you at the end is, what can we do to help preserve our history? And so I want you to think about that. We'll come back in a little bit, but it's just compelling the work you're doing. So thank you for taking the time in this research. It's critical work. I'd now like to introduce our final presenter, Dr. Guzski. Dr. Guzski is an associate professor and Bachelor of Arts coordinator at Buffalo State University, specializing in music history, opera studies, and performance culture. Her Radley Fellowship research highlights the groundbreaking career of Katerina Yabaro, whose artistry helped desegregate the New York opera stage. Through her work, Dr. Guzski brings renewed visibility to women whose artistic contributions reshaped American cultural history. Please help me welcome Dr. Guzski.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody can see my PowerPoint slide. Is it coming too?
It is. Yeah. It is.
Great. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Okay. American dramatic soprano Katarina Yarborough certainly exemplified the trailblazing, inclusive spirit of Dr. Virginia Radley in the arts and humanities. Yarborough was the first woman of color to perform a leading role with a white majority opera company in the United States. Her 1933 portrayal of Giuseppe Verdi's Aida with the New York-based Salmaggi Opera Company at Manhattan's massive Hippodrome Theater received national press recognition, some 2 decades before Marian Anderson's legendary Metropolitan Opera debut in 1955. Yet, despite advocacy from the Met Board of Directors chair, Paul Cravath, the renowned theater declined to integrate its artist roster at the height of the Depression. Undaunted, Yarborough embarked upon extended European sojourns throughout the 1930s, singing leading roles across the continent and achieving far-reaching influence on the post-World War II generation of Black artists who followed in her wake. Through her initial international appearances in Italy, Poland, the former Czechoslovakia, and the Baltics, Yarborough emerges as a key figure in the struggle to desegregate lyric stages on both sides of the Atlantic throughout the interwar era. Subsequently acclaimed in France and across Belgium, her artistic expatriate strategy culminated in title role performances in 3 operas at Brussels Théâtre Royal de la Monnaie. By offering critically lauded interpretations of roles previously dominated by white artists, Yarborough successfully introduced sophisticated audiences to a severely underutilized talent pool that challenged received opinion on who might contribute to old world art forms for the modern age. The soprano was born in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, the year that a deadly racial massacre assailed the city during a period now termed the nadir of American race relations. Yarborough's professional journey, however, began in Milan, where she became the first singer of color to perform Verdi's Aida in a major European venue in 1931. The artistic periodical Corriere di Milano observed a warm reception on the part of an audience drawn in large part by curiosity. Certainly, she gave more than listeners expected. An invitation to open audacious old-school impresario Alfredo Salmaggi's Hippodrome Opera Company in its 1935 New York season led to the career inflection point that Yarborough was hoping for. Her artist manager, George Lattimore, testified to the Black press, and this is the sole source, that the event was attended by touring Moscow art theater luminary Andreas Oleka-Zelinkas and Leon Leonidov, the group's business manager. Leading actor Michael Chekhov, nephew of the playwright, probably accompanied them. It was Leonidov, Lattimore remembered, who declared himself so impressed by Yarborough's performance, he immediately offered her a series of operatic engagements in leading cities in Europe. The artist's experience across the Baltic republics resulted in Yarborough's unexpectedly rapid engagements in both Latvia and Lithuania as a guest artist in dual-language Aida performances the following season. Yarborough's Riga Aida, seen here in a rare stage photograph at right, was a signal success with both critics and colleagues, as well as the country's president, visibly in attendance to the entire audience in a proscenium box, which is seen at left here in the modern photograph. In this high-pressure atmosphere, Yarborough was adjudged by the press to have seriously defended the honor of her race, and she was invited to return for a solo recital on the same stage the following season. At the Lithuanian State Opera, she stepped into the revival of Ludov Libert's expensively rebuilt Art Deco production opposite the leading tenor of Kypris Petrauskas, easily the dominant name on the house artist roster. It is therefore highly significant that Yarborough was re-engaged as Aida opposite him for a special 1937 postseason guest appearance at Kaunas. Yarborough also appeared in Poland at the leading theaters of Warsaw, alas burned in the World War II uprising, as well as Poznan, where another stage photograph is extant. Poland's capital city was warmly welcoming in commentary that evinced her artistic development in the role. Miss Yarborough fully demonstrated her singing skill, the maturity of her vocal style, and her stage orientation. She mastered the role of Aida comprehensively. In the former Czechoslovakia, Yarborough sang Aida at Brno and Pilsen, whose critic attempted to de-racialize his report by declaring Yarborough does not rely solely on her exotic origins, but is a gifted artist and is perfectly versed in the art of singing. These triumphs led to an important engagement for Yarborough at Monte Carlo, where she enjoyed a luxurious welcome, courtesy of charismatic longtime director Raoul Gunzburg, who insisted his singers stay at the adjacent Hôtel de Paris at management expense. Photographic evidence from Monaco, here at lower left, provides proof that Yarborough was not excluded from this perk, as she surely would have been in her own country, even in Northern American cities. Evening dress was de rigueur, as singers were considered walking advertisements to tempt the opéra's desired clientèle from the principality's competing distractions, the legendary casino entrance being only steps away from the Opera Theatre's parquet across a shared lobby in the magnificent Second Empire edifice. But it was in Belgium that Yarborough's New York-propelled international career reached its apex at the Théâtre Royal de la Monnaie, among the continent's most elite stages. There, the soprano was featured in no fewer than 3 title roles, including the world premiere production of Karl Goldmark's Die Königin von Saba, given in French translation. The opportunity to play the Queen of Sheba afforded Yarborough a brilliant opportunity to expand her vocal powers into the mid-range focus of the so-called falcon soprano, a skill she would also utilize for the title role of Zelika in Meyerbeer's L'Africaine. Yarborough's Monet fortunes were guided by its distinguished intendant, the conductor Maurice Cornet de Torrent, pictured here at right beside composer Alban Berg, who secured for her an Aida cachet that brushed up against the guest roster's female étoile, the Belgian coloratura Clara Kleber, but without quite exceeding it, certainly by design. Cornet may also have been behind press reports of Yarborough's engagement in Puccini's Tosca, the title role a histrionic Italian diva later made famous by Maria Callas, at Namur in Belgium's southern Wallonia region. The report excitingly challenged the concept of enforced racial verisimilitude between Black artists and the characters they were permitted to play as an entrenched article of faith on both sides of the Atlantic. The production failed to materialize disappointingly, but most probably for financial and not political reasons. Records suggest that the Belgian impresario may have intended to conduct Yarborough's Tosca himself, lending his enormous authority to a path-breaking and potentially controversial interracially cast romantic drama. Although Yarborough returned to the United States by necessity upon the outbreak of war in Europe, the soprano soon found herself singing at the FDR White House in 1940 in a musicale given by the First Lady, a notable hostess of Black artists. While Eleanor Roosevelt would remain silent on attaching any significance to this and similar invitations, in the year after her husband's death, she inveighed against the discriminatory policies of certain American lyric theaters in her widely read My Day newspaper column, a clear jab at the Metropolitan Opera. For her part, Yarborough launched a series of New York recitals beginning in 1942 that placed her in the crosshairs of North America's most exigent music critic, the Herald Tribune's Virgil Thompson, noting wryly that of any Negro artist we expect nothing less than perfection. Thompson continued of the Yarborough recital, A beautiful woman, superb of presence, gifted with a lyrico-dramatic voice, handsome in range and quality, she is also the possessor of a truly great dramatic temperament. No soprano at the Metropolitan Opera House is doing that kind of dramatic singing today. Just a week earlier, Thompson had responded to a reader query on the great contralto Marian Anderson. I have no way of knowing why Miss Anderson or any other singer is not on the rolls of the Metropolitan Opera, declared Thompson. Neither can I state definitely why that organization draws the color line. It remained for an undeterred Rudolph Bing to bring Marian Anderson to his integrated 1950s era Metropolitan Opera stage, and for NBC's televised opera theater to debut the young Leontine Price, 30 years Yarborough's junior, as the nation's first Black Tosca soon thereafter. Yarborough herself, interviewed in 1972 by CUNY theater professor James Billups and his drama class during her New York retirement, was philosophical on the evanescent legacy of the performing artist. Don't be surprised if you are forgotten. Yet her signal international achievements ring out unsurprisingly in a subsequent declaration, so typical of the Yarborough spirit. I should never have been forgotten in this city. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing her story and just the barriers she had to break in that journey. One of the questions I have, and primarily from that first performance in Milan, are there recordings?
I wish. I have scoured Europe for any broadcast audios. Principally in that day, it was radio that recorded most artists. I suspect that Yarborough did not get an actual recording contract from one of the big United States firms because she was Black. We find many white colleagues on a similar level as she, and I've done some qualitative compare and contrast of levels of critical acclaim, and there were others on her level that did receive those contracts, and she never. I was very excited about a complete broadcast of the Queen of Sheba coming from Belgium. I found a announcement of this, in 1937, and Belgium disappointingly just emailed me that their entire audio archive was destroyed during World War II in the Nazi invasion of Belgium. So it's apparently it is gone, but believe me, I have scoured and will continue to scour the world for a recording of her voice. And I think that is part of the reason her legacy has been neglected, because recording of major opera artists started with Enrico Caruso around the turn of the century, and a great many white opera artists were recorded, but not Yarborough.
Well, thank you, Dr. Guzski. And I guess I would be remiss if I also didn't mention that you are a world-traveling pianist. I've been all over the world, Switzerland, Japan, and I'm sure you are sharing the story of Yarborough where you go.
I am. And I also went to all of the theaters in Eastern Europe and the Baltics where she sang, and scoured the archives there in the spirit of my Radley fellow colleagues. And it was just a wonderfully fulfilling experience, especially to find 2 photographs of her in costume on those stages.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you to Dr. Masarik and Dr. Bailey. We are going to move in just a few, probably about 10, 15 minutes. A group discussion. Also part of this discussion is going to join Dr. Mazzolini, the 2025 Radley Fellow, who's beginning her research. And she's an associate professor in the Department of English at the University of Buffalo, where her work focuses on environmental humanities, rhetoric, and public memory. As the 2025 Radley Fellow, she is beginning her project on American Toxic, Love Canal, and Women's Stories and Testimonies, which centers the voices of women whose activism reshaped environmental policy and community advocacy in New York State. Her research brings critical attention to the ways women live experiences and public testimony influence environmental justice movements, and historical understanding. And so I don't know if she's on now, so maybe we'll hear from her. Oh, hello, Dr. Mazzolini. Would you like to share a little brief overview of your research and what inspired you to focus your work on this?
Hi, sure. I don't have a PowerPoint. I feel like Dr. Guzski and Dr. Masarik and Dr. Bailey sort of showed me how it was done. My research is into the question of toxic becoming a ubiquitous term used these days, quite metaphorically, and that led me to wonder about a time in recent history when it was decidedly material. And seeing as I live in Buffalo, that in turn led me to the Love Canal neighborhood of Niagara Falls, which is close by and which many of you might have heard of. A crisis there upon discovery of long buried industrial waste. The activism there eventually led to the law, which is today known as the Superfund. And the activism there was led mostly by women, by self-described housewives whose lived experience prevailed over the gaslighting that they were experiencing from officials. And as a result already of my research, I was able quite recently, I'll just share with this group, to organize a tour of the Love Canal neighborhood with one of the activists whose name is Luella Kenny, who was an activist then and who has and still is, and still has devoted her life to educating people about that moment in New York history and of women's activism in New York. I could go on, so I'll just leave it there.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. We knew we kind of threw you a curve to have you explain a little bit, but next year we hope to have you back and to give an overview of the results and your findings. So I wanted just a few minutes, one, to get to know all of you a little bit more. I think that our audience here, they understand the value of research, but some might be thinking, how did you get to where you are? Who mentored you? Who is that person in your life that maybe inspired you to go into the trajectory where you are today? So I'd love for everyone to kind of give a little bit more depth of your stories. I'm going to start with Dr. Guzski.
Okay. I knew you were going to pick somebody. Well, my archival research love affair began at a New York institution, our sister system, CUNY, at the Graduate Center. And I had no idea when I began my PhD journey that I would become so deeply involved. And it happened through the archives of the Metropolitan Opera, which follow a similar trajectory, surprisingly, as Professor Masarik has described, in terms of their, I won't quite say disarray, because they are organized, but in a completely analog mode. There is no finding aid. There was very little digitization of those archives, and it's only being done now as we speak. To bring, order to a truly massive collection. In their defense, I must say, this is a living archive. The Metropolitan Opera is performing tonight and will continue performing through May and June. And they're continually adding an immense amount of material to their collection. So it's truly a task, a Herculean task to organize it. So I followed with it without quite knowing it at the time, the Robert Caro distinguished dictum, turn every page. And I went through there the same way he went through the LBJ archive, I suppose, and just looked at a fascinating history unfolding of which artists of color were included on a very limited, restricted basis. But I did find the presence of choral singers and dancers in productions predating Marian Anderson. So it's not true that she was the first Black artist on its stage. She was the first Black artist to perform a principal role on its stage. And as such, she remains a titanic figure. But they were taking steps to integrate Black talent consonant with the emergence of the Black cultural movement during the Harlem Renaissance. That's as early as it started. And it was interesting to realize they sought to capitalize on that. It was very much an au courant type of thing, and they didn't want to be seen as a musical museum. They wanted to be seen consonant with artistic aesthetics of the day, and that meant Harlem Renaissance aesthetics. So they made some preliminary steps towards that, and it was wonderful to get my feet wet in some genealogical research of those individuals who came to the stage in those capacities, because the Met certainly didn't do their backstories. So through the recently opened census records and all kinds of digitized genealogical resources that we now have at our command, I could find who they were. And I was delighted to see the first big group that I found was centered in Queens, New York. They were members of a church, the musical leader of whom was a prominent Black actor of his day, Frank H. Wilson, who is in several films that many of us have seen from a century ago. We just may not know it. And from there, I found Wilson's granddaughter, and who recently has just passed away. So I was delighted to have been afforded the opportunity to interview her. And it just snowballed from there. And it was so fascinating. Like I said, I fell in love with the whole process and found things that even Met staff members told me they had no idea, and of course should.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Guzski. Dr. Bailey?
Well, I think I've been influenced by many people. And as I was mentioning in my presentation, I like to look from the local to the global. I think that the work that, and it's what's wonderful listening to these presentations, because I can see that there's that aspect there as well. But the person who's influenced me the most, perhaps, would be Mary Frances Berry. Professor Mary Frances Berry, who is the legal scholar and historian, recently retired from University of Pennsylvania, but she's the former chairwoman of the United States Civil Rights Commission. So she was appointed by Carter back in the day, President Carter back in the day, was very involved. She is the epitome of a scholar activist, and she was very involved in the Trans-Africa movement, meaning the movement to end apartheid in South Africa, and saw the connection as an African American. She's born in Nashville. As an African American, saw the connection of the freedoms of people of African descent here to the freedoms of people of African descent worldwide. So that has influenced me a lot in looking at even local histories in the larger context. And I should say, Harriet Tubman is a perfect example too. When things got really bad, Harriet Tubman had to abscond to Canada, our friends in Canada. And that's why she's well remembered there as well, because that was a time for her to protect her family and to have a respite from the difficulties and evade capture here in America, essentially. And we see, again, there's a transnational experience there. So I'm very thankful that I have both heroes of the past and present who look at things from the local to the global, and highly recommend that. I think that's what gives our work real resonance, when we can put it in a larger context and it has a universal meaning, which I do think it does in so many ways.
Thank you. Dr. Masarik?
So I mentioned I came to this research from a previous project. We were looking at Lilydale. I am part of a feminist historical podcast. Our podcast is Dig History. And myself and 4 other women formed this when we were graduate students at University of Buffalo. And we wanted to bring the type of history that we were learning in grad school to a wider public audience. And so we've been doing that podcast since 2017. We're coming up on our 10th year. We have over 150 episodes. It's kind of bonkers. And Cornell University Press, Three Hills Press, had actually approached us about doing that Spiritualism's Place book. So, it's been very inspiring to like get feedback from the community. We have a lot of educators that listen to our podcast. A lot of our podcast episodes actually come from people that are sending in, ideas or questions or whatever, like, hey, could you do a podcast episode on this or whatever? And so it's been a really great kind of communication with both the public and academics over the past 10 years. So I definitely gain a lot of support from working with these other women. Also having just great mentors at the University of Buffalo, Susan Kahn, Victoria Wolcott, Gail Radford, and then now at Brockport, and McPherson, our president of Brockport, and just a great kind of community there. So yeah, I mean, just like it all kind of feeds into one another. I think, Anne, you had mentioned, being the weirdo in the attic, going through the archives or whatever. And so it's great to be able to kind of bring this history to a larger audience. And I do just want to address really quick, there's a Q&A question about the Grange and how the New York State Grange is still a current organization, and it absolutely is. And that is kind of a thread, and particularly in agricultural history and rural history, that is very undermine and kind of our understanding of U.S. history and understanding of the Grange and politics. So that absolutely is something that I want to kind of bring out and further research. All of the Grange patrons of husbandry archives are held right now at Cornell University, and they have a really great collection there and a really great finding aid. So luckily all of that is very intact, but it just needs more historians looking at it and telling the stories of those rural New Yorkers that are important to the state as well.
Thank you, Dr. Masarik. And for those of you listening, please check out her podcast. It's www.digpodcast.org. Some great stories on there. So thank you for covering those. And last but not least, Dr. Mazzolini.
I would say one of my earliest remembered influences is a professor I had when I was an undergraduate. I'm not from New York State, but I've lived here for 11 years, and I went to Ohio State, and my mentor there was a scholar named Lee Gilmore, who writes about women's autobiographies. And she was such an encouraging and inspirational presence who modeled how to do scholarship with what I learned to be scholarship. And that was archivally based, theoretically informed, and rigorous, and storytelling. Now, I would say I'm not a historian, although some of my best friends are historians, and I do historically informed work. And so I have friends who are at other universities in rhetoric and in history, and who've been wonderful partners and inspirational scholars who have taught me how to use archives, and also inspired me to continue with the emphasis on storytelling in my work, and the emphasis on interpreting and elaborating on archival findings.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much for your time, for the amount of work that you've put into this research. If we could probably talk for another hour, even just leading into the call of action. So I hope that everyone listening feels inspired to share these stories, to preserve our history. And the way you would do that, Anne, is to talk about it, right? So we just have to keep discovering. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Sandvik for hosting this, to her entire team, Jenna Capucci, Jackie, Sarah Lynn, Shanna, to the mayor for sharing her perspective and insights on her leadership, to Trustee Burke for her continued commitment to research and innovation, and to our Radley Fellows, thank you. Keep up the great work. You are elevating these stories and legacies of women, and so from our past, and we will continue to share for our future. As we close, we invite everyone to carry forward today's call to action. And I'm going to repeat the quote that Dr. Sandvik said on Dr. Riley. The future of this country, and indeed of this world, relies on educated and enlightened citizenry. So let's keep sharing these stories. Let's remember Dr. Radley. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. As a quick reminder, the Radley and Pettigrew RFPs will be released in the fall 2026. So all the campuses that are listening, be on lookout for that. And again, we appreciate your time, participation, and commitment. We look forward to continue to work together.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thank you.